Alicia Harris had dreamed of being a pilot since she was a little girl. She grew up in a small town where planes often flew overhead, leaving white trails across the wide blue sky. Every time she saw them, her heart would beat faster. She would run to her backyard, tilt her head up, and imagine herself in the cockpit, guiding that powerful machine through the clouds. Years later, after years of study, long hours of training, and countless challenges, her dream became real. She became one of the few black female pilots in the country, a position that filled her family with pride and gave her a sense of accomplishment that words could not fully explain. On that bright morning, Alicia walked through the busy airport with her pilot's uniform neatly pressed, her bag on her shoulder, and her ID badge clipped in plain sight. She felt the usual sense of focus that came with duty. Every flight mattered to her. Passengers trusted her with their safety, and she never took that responsibility lightly. She knew that being a pilot wasn't only about flying a plane. It was about discipline, confidence, and respect for every single rule of the sky. The terminal was buzzing with voices, families saying goodbye, business travelers tapping on laptops, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, eager for adventure. Alicia walked calmly through it all, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. A few people noticed her uniform. Some even smiled. Pilots always carried a quiet kind of respect, a reminder of human courage and skill. Alicia nodded politely as she moved toward her assigned gate. But as she approached the boarding area, she noticed something odd. The two gate agents, both dressed in neat airline uniforms, were whispering to each other and looking at her with uncertain eyes. Alicia didn't think much of it at first. She assumed they were simply busy or dealing with a passenger issue. With her bag in hand, she walked confidently up to the desk, ready to show her documents and proceed to the cockpit. "Good morning," Alicia said in her calm, professional voice. "I'm Captain Harris, scheduled to pilot Flight 782 to Chicago." The agents exchanged a quick glance. One of them, a middle-aged woman with stiff posture, gave a hesitant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The other, a younger man, furrowed his brows as though something didn't make sense. May I see your ID?" the woman asked, her tone cautious. "Of course," Alicia replied, sliding her pilot's ID across the counter. Her name, photo, and credentials were clearly visible. The woman picked it up, studied it carefully, then looked back at Alicia, as if she was still unsure. The younger man leaned in to whisper something under his breath. Alicia noticed the way they kept glancing between her face and the ID, as though trying to spot a mistake. "This doesn't match," the man said finally, his words slow and doubtful. Alicia raised her eyebrows. "It matches exactly. That's me. I am scheduled to fly this aircraft." Her voice remained calm, though inside she felt a small wave of irritation. "I'm sorry," the woman said, shaking her head slightly. "We're going to have to confirm this with our supervisor. Please wait here for a moment." Passengers standing nearby began to notice. Some craned their necks, curious about the delay. A few pulled out phones, pretending to scroll but clearly listening in. Alicia could feel their eyes on her like silent questions floating in the air. "Why is the pilot being stopped? What's going on?" Alicia straightened her shoulders and stood tall. She had dealt with subtle doubt before. Being a black woman in a role where most were white men often meant she faced raised eyebrows or quiet surprise. Usually, once she spoke with authority or sat in the cockpit, people realized she was as capable as anyone. But this time, the doubt was not subtle. It was open, visible, and humiliating. The younger agent leaned toward his colleague again and whispered louder this time. "Are you sure she's a pilot? She doesn't look like one." The words were not meant for Alicia to hear, but she did. Her heart clenched. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She would not let anger show. She had worked too hard, earned too many hours in the air, and faced too many challenges to let careless words drag her down. "Yes," Alicia said firmly, her eyes focused on both of them. "I am the pilot, and this flight cannot leave without me. Please call your supervisor if you must, but I expect this matter to be handled quickly." The woman looked uneasy but nodded and picked up the phone. As she dialed, the man kept glancing at Alicia with suspicion, almost as if expecting her to slip up and admit she was lying. Alicia ignored him, keeping her posture strong. Minutes passed slowly. Around her, passengers started murmuring. Some were confused, others annoyed at the delay. One older man muttered, Why are they giving the pilot such a hard time? A mother hushed her curious child who kept asking, "Is she really flying the plane?" Alicia's mind raced back to her training days. She remembered nights when she had to study longer than everyone else, mornings when she was told she didn't belong in the aviation program, moments when instructors underestimated her until she proved them wrong with perfect scores. She remembered her mother's voice telling her, "Never let them make you feel small. You are just as capable as anyone else." Those words echoed in her heart now, giving her strength to stand still in dignity. Finally, the supervisor arrived, a tall man in a dark suit walking briskly. He took the ID from the agent, looked at it, then looked at Alicia. His face showed no surprise. "Yes, this is Captain Harris," he said flatly, handing back the card. "She's cleared to enter the cockpit." Relief washed over Alicia, but before she could move, the younger agent blurted out, "But sir, are we sure?" The supervisor cut him off sharply. "That's enough. She is the pilot. End of discussion." His tone carried authority, but the damage had already been done. As Alicia walked past the desk, head held high, she could feel the lingering stares from passengers. Some looked embarrassed for her, some looked quietly supportive, and others simply curious. She did not let her face show the sting she felt inside. She was a professional, and her duty was ahead of her. But deep inside, Alicia knew this incident was not just about her feelings. It was about something bigger. The open suspicion, the refusal to believe her credentials, the whisper that she didn't look like a pilot. These were not small things. They were signs of something wrong, something that should not be ignored. As she approached the jet bridge, Alicia pressed her lips together. She had been humiliated, yes, but she had also been reminded of her strength. She would not allow this moment to end with silent shame. She would do her job, and she would do it well. But she also knew, something inside told her, that this morning was only the beginning of a story that would shake the airline far more than they could MI. Alicia entered the jet bridge with steady steps, her pilot's bag bumping lightly against her leg. The words of the gate agent still echoed in her ears. She told herself to brush it off, but the sting was fresh. A part of her wanted to just forget the humiliation and focus on flying. But another part, a stronger part, whispered that what happened at the gate was not just a small mistake. It was part of a bigger problem, and she could not ignore it forever. She reached the cockpit door and placed her hand on the cool metal. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Flying had always been her refuge. Up in the clouds, there were no whispers, no doubters, no sideways glances. There was only the roar of engines, the steady hum of controls, and the endless sky stretching out like freedom. But before she could even step inside, she noticed something unusual. On the clipboard near the door, where flight preparations were listed, she saw missing signatures. Normally, every inspection step was checked and confirmed before the pilot arrived. Fuel hydraulics, engine pressure, emergency systems all had to be signed off. But here, several boxes were blank. Alicia frowned and flipped through the pages. Entire sections had been skipped. That was not normal. Just then, her co-pilot, Mark Daniels, arrived. He was a tall man in his early 40s, friendly and professional. He had flown with Alicia several times before and always treated her with respect. When he saw her, his eyes softened. "Rough morning?" he asked quietly, sensing something in her expression. "You could say that," Alicia replied, forcing a small smile. "They almost didn't let me in." Mark shook his head, sighing. "Unbelievable. Some people still can't see past their own blinders." Alicia gave a slight nod, then handed him the clipboard. "Take a look at this." Mark scanned the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. "These checks, they're not complete. Hydraulics, oxygen systems, even fire suppression. It looks like they skipped them." "That's what I thought," Alicia said. Her voice was calm, but inside anger began to build. This wasn't a small oversight. These were critical systems. If anything failed mid-flight, hundreds of lives would be at risk. Mark sighed again, heavier this time. "I've seen shortcuts before, but this is bad. Looks like they're rushing to turn planes around faster." Alicia remembered other times when she raised concerns. A loose bolt here, a missing checklist there, always brushed off as not serious. She remembered once hearing a mechanic quietly complain that management had ordered them to speed things up or risk losing hours. Safety, it seemed, was becoming secondary to profit. She placed the clipboard firmly on the console. I'm not flying this plane until everything is checked properly, period. Mark nodded slowly. He respected her stance, but his eyes carried worry. You know they won't like that. Management wants this flight in the air on time. They'll pressure us. I know, Alicia replied, her jaw tightening. But my responsibility is to these passengers, not their schedules. As if on cue, the supervisor from earlier appeared in the jet bridge, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He leaned in, his tone clipped. Captain Harris, what's the delay? The passengers are boarding, and we need to push back in 15 minutes. Alicia turned to face him directly. The pre-flight checks are incomplete. I will not authorize departure until they are fully signed off. The supervisor's jaw twitched. Those are minor details. The plane is fine. We can't afford another delay. Minor details? Alicia repeated, her voice steady but sharp. Hydraulics and oxygen systems are not minor. If you want this plane in the air, you'll get maintenance to finish their job. Until then, it's grounded. The man narrowed his eyes, clearly unused to being challenged. Passengers passing by glanced curiously, sensing tension. Alicia stood her ground, her uniform crisp, her eyes unflinching. Mark spoke up quietly but firmly. She's right. We don't fly without completed checks. The supervisor's lips pressed into a thin line. He muttered something under his breath, then turned sharply and walked back toward the gate. Alicia exhaled slowly. She knew this was only the beginning. As she and Mark prepared the cockpit, she could hear faint murmurs outside. Passengers were growing restless. The delay at the gate, followed by another holdup, was making them uneasy. A child's cry echoed through the cabin, and a man's voice rose in complaint. The cabin crew tried to calm everyone, but whispers spread quickly. Alicia's mind wandered back to the gate incident. The humiliation she had faced, the doubts cast on her identity, now connected to what she was seeing here. It wasn't just her. The entire system was built on flawed assumptions, on shortcuts, on ignoring what was right. She had worked too hard to be silent now. Mark looked at her, noticing the storm behind her calm eyes. You're thinking about what happened earlier, aren't you? Yes, Alicia admitted softly. They didn't want to believe I was the pilot. And now they don't want to believe the plane isn't ready. It's the same thing. They don't respect truth until it's too late. Mark gave her a thoughtful nod. Then maybe it's time someone makes them listen. Alicia stared at the checklist again, her fingers brushing over the empty boxes. She knew she had a choice. She could let this slide, sign off anyway, and keep her head down. That would be easier. But then she would carry the weight of silence. The same silence that allowed humiliation and danger to grow unchecked. Or she could take a stand, risk her comfort, risk her career, but do what was right. As passengers settled uneasily in their seats, Alicia made her choice. She picked up the radio and called for maintenance, her voice clear. This is Captain Harris on Flight 782. Pre-flight checks are incomplete. I'm requesting immediate attention before departure. This aircraft will not move until full compliance is confirmed. There was a pause on the other end. Then a reluctant voice replied, Understood, Captain. We'll send a crew. Mark gave her a small, supportive smile. That's the right call. Alicia nodded, though her chest felt heavy. She knew the fight had only just begun. The humiliation at the gate had lit a fire inside her, and the missing safety checks poured fuel on it. What she didn't yet realize was that this decision, the refusal to bow to pressure, was about to set in motion events that would expose far more than anyone expected. In the cabin, passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some complained about delays, but others whispered admiration for the calm authority of the pilot they had seen walk by. A few had noticed the unfair treatment she faced at the gate. Now, watching her refuse shortcuts, they sensed something bigger was happening. Alicia adjusted her headset and looked out the cockpit window at the long line of planes waiting on the tarmac. She felt the weight of every soul on board resting on her shoulders. And in that moment, she promised herself silently she would protect them even if it meant standing alone against the entire airline. Alicia sat quietly in the cockpit, the soft hum of air conditioning filling the silence. Her hands rested on the control yoke, but her mind was not on flying yet. She kept thinking about the empty boxes on the checklist, the skipped inspections, and the way management had brushed it off as minor. The passengers sitting behind her had no idea what was happening, no idea that their safety had been left to chance. She thought of the children on board, the families, the grandparents, all of them depending on her to do the right thing. That responsibility weighed heavily, but it also gave her strength. A knock on the cockpit door pulled her from her thoughts. Mark reached over and opened it. A maintenance worker stepped inside carrying a clipboard. He was sweating slightly, his orange vest wrinkled from long hours. His eyes darted nervously between Alicia and Mark. "Captain Harris," he said quietly, "we've been told to, clear the checklist." "Clear the checklist?" Alicia asked, narrowing her eyes. "Or complete the checklist?" The man swallowed hard. "Management wants this flight out. They said just mark it off. The plane is fine." Mark leaned back in his seat, sighing in frustration. Alicia, however, sat up straighter, her voice calm but firm. "You and I both know that's against regulations. I want the checks done properly, step by step. If that takes another hour, then that's what it takes." The worker shifted uncomfortably. "If I do that, I'll get in trouble. They're already angry with me for being slow on other flights." Alicia's eyes softened, though her tone stayed steady. "I understand. But if you don't and something happens up there, lives will be at risk. Which trouble do you want? Angry managers or the weight of knowing you let people fly unsafe?" The worker looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his head and nodded. "I'll do the full check." When he left, Mark turned to Alicia with admiration. "You didn't just tell him what to do. You reminded him why it matters. That's leadership." Alicia didn't smile. "It's not about me, Mark. It's about the people back there. They deserve better than shortcuts." Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Passengers grew more restless, some pressing the call buttons, others questioning the cabin crew. A businessman in row 4 demanded answers, while a mother rocked her crying baby, whispering comfort. The cabin crew tried to calm everyone, but rumors began to spread. Some passengers thought there was a mechanical problem. Others whispered about the pilot at the gate. Phones came out, posts appeared online, and the story began to ripple beyond the walls of the plane. Finally, the maintenance worker returned, his clipboard filled with fresh signatures. He looked tired, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "All checks complete, Captain. Everything is in order now." "Thank you," Alicia said, her voice sincere. "You did the right thing." He gave a small nod before leaving. Mark turned to her. "So we're clear to go now. But I have a feeling management isn't going to let this slide." Alicia adjusted her headset, her expression resolute. "Then they'll have to deal with me." Just as she spoke, the supervisor returned, his face tight with anger. He leaned into the cockpit, lowering his voice to a sharp whisper. "Captain Harris, this delay has cost us thousands of dollars already. Do you realize how much trouble you're causing?" Alicia turned her head slowly to face him, her eyes steady. "I realize that if we had taken off without proper checks and something failed, it could cost lives. Which trouble is more important to you?" The supervisor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he huffed and walked away, muttering under his breath. Mark chuckled softly. "You know, most people would have just given in, but not you." Alicia didn't answer. She was thinking of something larger than this flight. If safety was being ignored here, it was probably happening across the airline. How many other flights had gone out with incomplete checks? How many passengers had unknowingly flown on unsafe planes? The thought made her chest tighten. At that moment, the intercom crackled. A flight attendant's nervous voice came through. "Captain, we have passengers asking for an update." "Should we make an announcement?" Alicia nodded, picking up the microphone. Her voice carried steady authority as it filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harris. We apologize for the delay. We are ensuring that every safety check is properly completed before departure. Your safety is our top priority, and we will not leave until everything is confirmed. Thank you for your patience." As the words echoed through the plane, a hush fell over the cabin. Some passengers sighed with relief, others nodded approvingly. A few even clapped quietly, appreciating her honesty. For many, this was the first time a pilot had spoken so directly about what was happening. Mark leaned back, smiling faintly. "You just won them over." Alicia shook her head. "I didn't do it for that. I did it because it's the truth." The maintenance checks were complete, and technically they were now cleared to depart. But Alicia's mind was not at ease. She thought of the supervisor's words, the pressure to skip steps, the culture of silence that seemed to run deep. If she flew this plane now, she would be complicit in that silence. And she wasn't sure she could carry that weight. Her heart pounded as she made a decision. She reached for the radio and called air traffic control. "This is Captain Harris of Flight 782, requesting clearance delay." Aircraft grounded pending further review. Mark's eyes widened. You're grounding the flight? Yes, Alicia said firmly. If this happened once, it can happen again. We need inspectors to look into this. I won't risk lives just to keep a schedule. The cabin crew gasped when they heard. Passengers murmured louder and word spread quickly. Some groaned in frustration, but others spoke words of support. She's doing the right thing, one woman said aloud. I'd rather be safe on the ground than sorry in the air. Within minutes, messages shot through the airline. Phones rang, managers argued, and tension filled the air like a storm ready to break. Alicia sat silently, her hands folded, waiting. She felt the weight of every eye on her, both inside and outside the plane. But she didn't flinch. She had walked through humiliation at the gate. She had faced doubt, suspicion, and whispers that she didn't belong. And yet here she was, holding the authority to stop everything with a single decision. She knew management would be furious. She knew this might cost her position. But deep inside, she also knew this was her moment. Alicia Harris had not come this far to back down now. The cabin had grown tense after Alicia made the announcement that the aircraft would remain grounded. Some passengers complained loudly, while others spoke in hushed tones, unsure of what exactly was going on. But no matter how many frustrated sighs or tapping fingers filled the aisles, Alicia knew she had made the right call. She sat in the cockpit, her shoulders square, her eyes fixed on the panel in front of her. Though her mind was already preparing for the confrontation she knew was coming. It did not take long. The supervisor returned, this time with another man beside him, a manager with sharp glasses, a polished suit, and an expression that carried both authority and annoyance. He leaned into the cockpit, his tone clipped. Captain Harris, he began, we've just received word you grounded this flight. Do you realize the chaos you've created? These passengers have connections, the airline has schedules, and now you're forcing delays across the system. Alicia turned her head slowly to look at him. I grounded this flight because safety checks were skipped. I will not fly until a full inspection is done. That is not chaos, it is responsibility. The man adjusted his glasses, his jaw tightening. The plane is safe. We've been running flights like this for months without incident. Mark, sitting beside Alicia, raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Did you just admit that? You've been sending planes out with incomplete checks? The man shot him a warning glare. It's called efficiency. If we checked every small box, we'd never run on time. Customers demand punctuality, not paperwork. Alicia's hands curled into fists, though her voice remained even. What customers demand is their lives protected. If something happens mid-air, punctuality won't matter. Safety isn't optional. It's the law. Passengers sitting near the front overheard the exchange. One woman pulled out her phone and began recording. A young man across the aisle whispered, "She's standing up to them." Soon, more phones lifted into the air, tiny cameras quietly capturing the moment. The manager noticed and lowered his voice, but the edge in his tone sharpened. Look, Captain, I suggest you think carefully about your career. Do you want to be remembered as the pilot who ruined an airline schedule and embarrassed her own company? Or the one who cooperated and kept things moving? Alicia held his gaze without flinching. I'd rather be remembered as the pilot who refused to risk lives for profit. There was a long silence. The man's lips pressed into a thin line, and then he pulled back from the cockpit with a huff. You'll regret this. He walked away, the supervisor trailing after him. Mark let out a low whistle. Well, that was bold. And exactly what needed to be said. Alicia exhaled slowly. It's not about boldness, Mark, it's about truth. If they're willing to admit shortcuts openly, who knows what else they've been hiding. Outside the cockpit, whispers spread quickly. Some passengers grumbled, but others voiced support. A father holding his little girl said loudly, I want a pilot who cares about safety more than schedules. His words carried across the rows, calming some of the restless tension. By now, the recording passengers were uploading their videos online. Within minutes, clips of Alicia's calm but firm stand against the managers began to circulate. Black pilot grounds plane over safety violations flashed across screens as people shared the footage. Comments poured in, some praising her bravery, others shocked that an airline would dare skip safety checks. The story was already leaving the walls of the aircraft. Back inside, Alicia radioed air traffic control again. This is Captain Harris. I am formally requesting Federal Aviation inspectors to be dispatched for review. Potential violations suspected. The controller's voice came back after a pause, professional and calm. Request acknowledged, Captain. Inspectors will be notified. Mark looked at her, half impressed, half nervous. Do you know what you've just done? You've opened the door for a full investigation. Yes, Alicia said simply, and that's exactly what needs to happen. An hour later, two officials in Navy jackets marked with the Aviation Authority's insignia arrived at the gate. Passengers perked up as they walked through the aisle, their presence sparking both relief and curiosity. The inspectors stepped into the cockpit, introducing themselves with clipped professionalism. Alicia explained everything, the incomplete checklist, the pressure from management, and the supervisor's words. She showed them the documents, pointing out the missing signatures and the rushed corrections. The inspectors exchanged grim looks, jotting notes. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes, turned to Alicia. You did the right thing. This is serious. We'll need to expand this review to the entire airline. When they stepped back out, passengers leaned in, catching bits of their conversation.
Violations.
Unsafe procedures. Investigation. The whispers grew louder. Some passengers began clapping softly, others voicing support for Alicia. What began as frustration had turned into admiration. They realized they weren't just delayed, they were witnessing something important. Meanwhile, reporters at the airport caught wind of the story from social media. Cameras soon appeared outside the gate, journalists eager to capture footage of the pilot who grounded her own airline. The manager, pale with frustration, tried to control the narrative, but the inspectors brushed him aside, their authority unquestionable. Alicia sat quietly in the cockpit, her heart pounding. She hadn't planned for this. She only wanted to keep her passengers safe. But now it had become larger than her, larger than this flight. She was exposing a system built on cutting corners, a culture that cared more for money than for lives. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. You know, you might have just changed everything. Alicia gave a small, tired smile. Maybe. Or maybe I've just started something I can't turn back from. Hours passed. The flight was officially canceled, passengers rebooked on safer planes. Though some grumbled, most thanked Alicia as they left, shaking her hand, telling her they admired her courage. A young woman whispered, You inspired me. My brother wants to be a pilot, and I'll tell him about you. An older man patted her shoulder. I flew in the Air Force, I know what it takes. You did the right thing, Captain. By evening, the story was all over the news. Footage of Alicia's stand played on national television. Headlines read, Pilot refuses to fly unsafe plane. Airline under investigation after pilot grounds aircraft. And bravery in the cockpit. Social media flooded with praise. Hashtags with her name trended, and messages poured in from aspiring pilots' parents and travelers. The airline tried to release a statement, calling it a miscommunication, but few believed it. The inspectors confirmed violations, uncovering a pattern of skipped checks across multiple flights. The investigation widened, and the airline's reputation sank. Alicia watched it all unfold from her small apartment that night, still in her uniform. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls from colleagues, texts from friends, even strangers sending thanks. She felt overwhelmed, but also deeply at peace. She hadn't set out to be a hero. She only wanted to do her job with honesty. But maybe sometimes doing your job right was the bravest thing of all. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought of her childhood, staring up at planes in the sky. Back then, she dreamed only of flying. She never imagined she would one day ground a plane, ground an entire airline in the name of safety and truth. But life had a way of bringing challenges to those who were prepared to face them, and Alicia Harris had faced them with courage. The morning after the flight was grounded, Alicia woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, texts, and notifications lit up her screen like never before. Friends sent her links to news reports. Colleagues messaged words of support, and strangers she had never met thanked her for her courage. She sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the weight of the previous day, unsure if she was ready to face what came next. She turned on the television, and her heart skipped. Her face was on the screen. The news anchor's voice filled the small apartment. A black female pilot, Captain Alicia Harris, took an extraordinary stand yesterday when she refused to fly an aircraft that had incomplete safety checks. Her decision led to a full investigation of the airline, revealing widespread violations. Passengers recorded her confrontation with management, and the video has since gone viral. Alicia sat still, her coffee cooling in her hand. She never wanted fame. She wanted safety, fairness, respect. But suddenly her name was on every channel. Later that day, she walked into the airport not as an unknown face, but as someone everyone recognized. Employees paused, some smiling, some whispering. A few clapped quietly when she passed. At first, it felt overwhelming. But then, a young flight attendant walked up to her. "Captain Harris," she said softly. "Thank you. You don't know how many times we've noticed things but stayed quiet. You gave us courage." Alicia's eyes warmed and she nodded. "Never forget, you have the right to speak when lives are at stake." Meanwhile, inspectors continued digging deeper. They discovered that shortcuts were not just occasional, they were part of a system encouraged by higher management to cut costs. Planes had flown with rushed checks, paperwork had been falsified, and employees pressured to keep quiet. Alicia's single decision had opened the door to all of it. The airline tried to control the damage, releasing statements to calm the public. But the more they spoke, the more truth came out. News channels interviewed passengers from Alicia's flight, many of whom praised her. A mother with her toddler said, "She protected my child." "I'll never forget that," a businessman admitted. "At first I was frustrated about the delay, but now I realize she saved us from a much bigger danger." One video clip showed Alicia's calm face as she told the manager, "I'd rather be remembered as the pilot who refused to risk lives for profit." That single line spread everywhere. People repeated it online, in articles, even in speeches about integrity. A week later, Alicia was called to testify in front of aviation regulators. Dressed in her uniform, she walked into the large hall filled with officials, reporters, and cameras. Her steps were steady, though her heart pounded. When she sat at the table, she looked directly at the panel. They asked her to explain what happened. She spoke simply, honestly. She told them about the incomplete checklist, the pressure to fly anyway, the culture of silence. She didn't raise her voice or dramatize her words. She just told the truth. And in that quiet truth, the weight of her message sank deep. One regulator leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. "Captain Harris, you've reminded us what our profession stands for." "Thank you." As she left the hall, cameras flashed, but what touched her more were the young students waiting outside. They held notebooks, some in flight school uniforms. One girl stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I want to be a pilot too." "Seeing you? It makes me believe I can." Alicia's throat tightened. She bent down slightly, meeting the girl's eyes. "You can. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. The sky is for all of us." Those words spread just as fast as her earlier ones. Soon schools invited her to speak. Organizations asked her to share her story, and pilots across the country called her an example. Of course, the airline wasn't happy. Management tried to paint her as difficult or reckless, but the evidence against them was too strong. Inspectors fined the company millions of dollars, forcing leadership changes and new safety protocols. What once had been hidden was now on display for the world. Through it all, Alicia stayed humble. She still woke early, ironed her uniform, and prepared for her flights with the same discipline. To her, nothing had changed, except maybe now people looked at her differently. Passengers smiled wider when they saw her at the cockpit door. Some even thanked her before boarding. A few children asked for pictures, their eyes full of wonder. One evening, after a long flight, Alicia walked through the quiet airport. A man in a suit stopped her. He was one of the passengers from that grounded flight. He reached out his hand. "Captain Harris," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't thank you properly that day. I complained about the delay, but now, I just want to say you might have saved my life. And my daughter's." Alicia shook his hand, her smile gentle. "You don't need to thank me. I was only doing what any pilot should do." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't just any pilot. It was her decision. Her refusal to bow that had made the difference. That night, back home, she stood by her window looking out at the stars. She thought of her younger self, the girl staring at planes with wide eyes dreaming of the sky. That girl wanted to fly. And now, the woman she had become had not only flown but had stood tall on the ground when it mattered most. She realized something important. Sometimes being a pilot wasn't only about guiding planes through storms in the air. Sometimes it was about facing storms on the ground, storms of doubt, prejudice, and pressure, and guiding people through those too. Her story wasn't about humiliation anymore. It wasn't about the gate agent's doubt or the manager's threats. It was about resilience, courage, and truth. It was about one woman refusing to be silent and, in doing so, giving a voice to many who had been afraid to speak. Alicia Harris went to bed that night with peace in her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More flights, more challenges, perhaps more fights for justice. But she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came, she would face it with the same calm courage she carried in the cockpit. Because once you have looked into the eyes of those who depend on you, once you have stood for what is right in the face of pressure, there is no turning back. The sky was her dream, but truth had become her duty. And in that balance, Alicia found her purpose.